I had just graduated from high school and decided to embark on a solo camping trip deep in the woods to take a break from the stress of everyday life. I live in Wisconsin and have camped alone countless times. I walked for about an hour before I found a spot near a lake and pitched my tent there. Night fell swiftly, and I decided to go to sleep. Just as I began to drift off to sleep, I was abruptly jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. It echoed through the night, piercing the silence and freezing me in place. The sound was so raw, so filled with agony, that I could feel my own fear mirrored in it. I scrambled out of my tent, my heart pounding like a drum. My flashlight's feeble beam cut through the darkness as I searched for the source of the scream. I called out, but there was no response, only an eerie stillness that hung in the air. Unable to find anyone, I returned to my tent, shaken and on edge. Sleep eluded me, and I lay there, wide-eyed, listening to the symphony of nocturnal sounds that surrounded me. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a haunting melody. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of the whispers, but they remained just out of reach, like a forgotten memory. Hours passed, and exhaustion finally claimed me. I was deep in slumber when I was rudely awakened by the sound of scratching at my tent. My eyes shot open, and my heart raced. What could be outside, scratching at my fragile shelter? I held my breath, my body frozen with fear. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, as if something desperate was trying to get in. The fabric of my tent bulged and warped with each scrape, threatening to tear. Panic surged through me, and I knew I had to act. Summoning every ounce of courage, I unzipped the tent and burst out into the night. I looked in the direction of the scratches. I heard leaves rustling and got a glimpse of something or someone disappearing into the bushes and the darkness that laid behind. My heart pounded as I slowly retreated back into my tent. What was that? Wolves, a bear, a creepy stranger? I stayed up all night, frightened and on guard. When dawn finally broke, I emerged from my tent, weary and disheveled. I packed up my belongings, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of the forest. To this day, I have no clue of what I experienced in those woods. One thing is for sure, I am never going camping alone ever again. The wind howled through the ancient trees as my dad and I embarked on our weekend camping trip. We had chosen the perfect forest, a hidden gem known only to us, with its serene river and secluded campsites. Once we had set up our campsite and performed all the necessary rituals of camping, night descended upon us like a thick veil. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I suddenly got an urgent need to pee. Reluctantly, I unzipped my tent and ventured into the inky blackness. A chill ran down my spine as I returned. Something was not right. I peered into my dad's tent, expecting to find him slumbering peacefully, but he was nowhere to be found. A sense of unease washed over me. He might have gone to relieve himself as well. I returned to my own tent and drifted back into a restless sleep. Morning arrived, and with it, a gut-wrenching revelation. Before I could even investigate my father's tent, a disembodied whisper echoed through the air, freezing me in my tracks. "That's not me!" The words hung in the air like a specter, chilling my bones. I spun around, only to find my father lurking behind a tree, his face as pale as it can get. Fear coursed through my veins as I sprinted towards him. "What's happening? Why do we need to leave?" I stammered, my voice trembling with terror. His reply was a mere whisper carried on a frigid breeze. "We have to get out of here. I'll explain when we're safe in the car." With a sense of urgency, we hastily packed our belongings, leaving the tents behind like discarded memories. Once we were a safe distance away, my father shared the horrifying truth. "I had to leave you alone briefly to fetch some supplies we had forgotten. I feel guilty for leaving you vulnerable, but when I returned, I witnessed someone entering my tent. I hid behind a tree all night, watching and waiting, ensuring they wouldn't harm you." The realization hit me like a sledgehammer, shattering my peace of mind. "So, the person sleeping wasn't you?" I whispered, my paranoia intensifying. He nodded solemnly. "I waited until morning to tell you so we could escape before they realized our discovery. We vowed to never return to those haunted woods, forever scarred by the phantom presence that had infiltrated our sanctuary. Every time I gaze into the wilderness, I can't help but wonder, are we truly alone in the darkness?" For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to go camping. As a young kid, I bought the Boy Scouts handbook and really did my best to learn everything about being in the outdoors. But I had no outlet. My parents come from a third world country, fleeing war and poverty. So for them it was like, why in the world would we go live in a tent even for a night? We literally have been running away from all of that our entire lives. So it wasn't until I was much older, in my 30s, where I really felt free enough to go camping. I collected all the gear I needed, started out hiking, and then did some overnight trips. Soon it became a very regular thing for me. Unfortunately, I don't have too many friends, so I would go all by myself out and I would find different spots to camp at. I found a few gems in the process, and one spot in particular became my favorite. I was not from the area I was camping at, so I didn't know how safe the spots I was going to were. Ignorance was bliss, though, so I felt totally safe at every single spot I went to. Because of my job, I could only do single-night trips. I would leave work, car pack the previous night, and go straight to the mountains, set up camp, and just enjoy the evening, usually by cooking awesome stuff and acting like a caveman. There is one spot I fell in love with. It is nearby a lake, and the whole area was just magic to me. I very rarely encountered people there. That all changed on this one particular trip. I got to my spot. There were no cell service, and the nearest town was 15 or 20 minutes away along crazy mountainous roads. I set up my tarp in my sleeping area. I like sleeping in the open more than sleeping in a tent, so I had a little cot set up next to my fire. With my headlamp on, I got all of my food prepped, and I started cooking. At this point, it was probably midnight. Because I had to make these trips straight out of work, I would be doing most of the camp-related stuff in the late evening hours, which totally didn't bother me. As I am cooking, I am walking around my site and suddenly I see a light being flashed right at me. I realized a person was walking into my camp area. It scared the breath out of me. It was the most visceral physical fear I have ever felt. I instantly felt afraid for my life because it was so late and this stranger just popped out of the forest. I thought the absolute worst. I backed up away from the person, and I took a look at him. It was a young dude, late teens I would say, dark complexion. He was wearing shorts, a t-shirt, an unzipped backpack, and no shoes. His appearance did nothing to take away my fear. Looking at him, I was sure he was a crazy person. He started talking and apologized for scaring me. He started telling me about how he was with his two friends, a guy and a girl. And he was telling me about how the guy started acting crazy and pulled out a knife and started getting super aggressive. He told me that he lived in that town that was 15 minutes away. He said he ditched his friends because he felt so unsafe with them. Then he started going off on tangents, talking about his favorite spots in the area. The entire time I kept thinking about how to defend myself if he came at me. At some point, he started saying things like, "Hey bro, if you ever needed to hide a body, I know the exact right spots to make that happen." This dude was sending alarm bells off in my mind, but I was afraid of sending him off the deep end. I let him talk for a while, and he seemed to relax. I could see through his shorts that he had a gun. My heart skipped a beat. I had 2 knives and an axe nearby to me, so I decided that I needed to act. He seemed relaxed, so I told him, "Hey man, no disrespect, but I need you to leave my camp. I need my privacy, so I need you to go away." He said something to the effect of, "Oh, I respect you being straight up, most people would not be." We said our goodbyes and I watched him walk off. Let me tell you, I was so afraid for my life. I was in shock too. I didn't know what was the right thing to do. I couldn't call anyone. I was far from real civilization, and I started to feel more and more unsafe with each passing minute. Then I heard screaming. It sounded like a man and woman arguing. I heard a car drive off, and one final shriek from the girl. Then silence. I started to go crazy. I eventually decided that it was deeply unsafe for me to stay. There was a 50-50 chance that the person I encountered was a dangerous person. I could stay, but I would be risking being attacked in the middle of the night. So I packed all of my stuff into my car and left. I drove to a nearby town and parked somewhere quiet and just slept in my car. I couldn't camp for an entire year after that. The idea that I could be laying on a cot or even in a tent and some stranger could be walking in my camp while I'm asleep, I couldn't get over it. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and comment on this video. If you want more creepy stories like these, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.